If you own a home, or you're thinking about buying one, you need to hear this. And I mean really hear it, not nod along while you scroll on your phone pretending this doesn't apply to you. Because it does. What we're in right now is not something that's coming someday. It's not a maybe. It's not a theory. The bubble isn't forming. It's already here. It's been inflating quietly, politely, right under people's noses while everyone smiles and says real estate always goes up. I've heard that sentence before. A lot. I heard it in 2006. I heard it in 2007. And I remember exactly how that movie ended. Here's the uncomfortable part. Bubbles don't announce themselves. They don't send invitations. They feel normal right up until the moment they don't. Prices look strong. Neighbors look confident. Banks look friendly. Everyone feels smart. That's usually the most dangerous moment of all. I'm not here to impress you with credentials or talk about how many decades I've been around. That's not the point. The point is this: markets move in patterns. Human behavior repeats. Debt always tells the truth eventually, even when people don't want to hear it. And right now, the math is whispering something most people are refusing to listen to. Let me ask you something, and don't answer it out loud. Just think about it. What if the house you believe is your safety, the thing that helps you sleep at night, is actually the biggest risk you're carrying? What if that smart decision turns into a very expensive lesson? I know that sounds dramatic. Trust me, reality is usually far more dramatic than any warning. I'm not here to scare you for entertainment. I'm here because ignoring this costs real money, real years, real peace of mind. And the people who pay the highest price are always the ones who thought, this time is different. I want you to picture something that's become completely normal. A couple with a decent income, nothing extravagant, 60, maybe 70,000 a year. They're not reckless people. They're not gamblers. They work hard, pay their bills, do what they're told, and somehow they're signing papers on a house that costs $600,000, $700,000, sometimes more, and everyone around them is smiling like this is a win. They tell themselves the same things I hear over and over again. At least I'm building equity. Renting is throwing money away. I can manage the payments, and on paper for a moment it almost looks true. The mortgage fits. Barely. It eats up 40, sometimes 50% of their income, but hey, that's the price of safety now, right? Here's what never shows up in those glossy conversations. Property taxes don't care how confident you feel. Insurance companies don't care how optimistic you are. Roofs don't politely wait until you're ready to replace them. Furnaces have terrible timing. And somehow all of those bills show up right when people are already stretched thin. I've watched this movie too many times. Everything looks fine as long as nothing goes wrong, but life is very good at making sure something always goes wrong. A job loss, a medical bill, a rate reset, a tax hike, just one small push and suddenly that manageable payment turns into a chokehold. You're not saving anymore. You're not investing. You're not breathing. You're surviving inside a house that was supposed to make you feel secure. And this is where people get defensive. They say, but my house went up in value. On paper, maybe. Paper is very generous. Paper doesn't ask you to write a check every month. Paper doesn't panic at 3 a.m., wondering how long the savings will last. Paper equity feels amazing until you realize you can't eat it, you can't access it, and you can't rely on it when the system tightens. Let me be very clear without judging anyone. A house is not wealth if owning it drains every ounce of your flexibility. An asset you cannot afford to hold is not an asset. It's a liability wearing a very expensive disguise. And the most dangerous part, most people don't realize they're trapped until the door quietly locks behind them. At this point, I want you to take a breath and let yourself off the hook. Because what's happening right now isn't just about individual buyers making bad decisions. This isn't a story about people being irresponsible or foolish. This is a system-wide problem, and systems fail long before individuals realize they're standing on weak ground. It didn't stop with families buying homes they could barely afford. Investors saw the same thing and said, "Great, leverage it." Small investors bought one, then two, then 5 properties. Big funds bought thousands. Different scale, same assumption. The rent will cover it. Cash flow will handle the debt. Prices can't go down. Real estate only moves one direction, right? That belief is the glue holding this entire structure together. As long as rent keeps rising and tenants keep paying, the illusion works. On spreadsheets, it looks beautiful. On podcasts, it sounds genius, but reality has a way of interrupting these fantasies. Here's what happens when the rental market softens. Tenants push back. They move in with roommates. They downsize. They leave cities. Suddenly, those perfectly modeled cash flows don't quite cover the mortgage anymore. Maintenance doesn't pause. Taxes don't negotiate. Insurance doesn't feel sympathetic. And that's when investors discover something uncomfortable. Leverage works both ways. I've watched this play out repeatedly. When the numbers stop working, nobody sticks around out of loyalty. Nobody says, "I'll just take a loss for a few years." They run. They all run. Quietly at first. One property sold here, a small portfolio trimmed there, but exits have a funny way of accelerating once they start. And here's the part most people miss. A bubble doesn't need a meteor to destroy it. It doesn't need a dramatic headline. It just needs a crack. One rate hike, one employment shock, one shift in behavior. Once confidence breaks, the story changes overnight. The same people who told you prices could never fall suddenly explain why selling now is the prudent move. This isn't chaos. It's cause and effect. A system built on cheap money and endless optimism becomes fragile the moment conditions change, and conditions always change. That's not pessimism. That's reality. So if you're feeling uneasy watching this unfold, that's not weakness. That's awareness. Because the real danger isn't making a mistake inside a broken system. The real danger is believing the system itself can't break. Let me pull the curtain back now, because once you see what actually inflated this thing, it all starts to make uncomfortable sense. Bubbles don't grow by magic. They grow because multiple forces push in the same direction at the same time, and everyone pretends that's permanent. It started with money. A lot of money. During the pandemic, cash flooded the system. Stimulus checks, emergency programs, cheap credit everywhere you looked. Suddenly, people who were just getting by felt richer. Not actually richer, of course, but liquid. And when people feel liquid, they spend. They don't sit around asking philosophical questions about valuation. They say, "Now is the time." Demand exploded overnight, but the number of houses didn't. Economics isn't sentimental. When demand spikes and supply, doesn't prices go vertical? This works. Until it doesn't. Then came the second accelerant, interest rates that were basically free. When borrowing costs almost nothing, risk loses its teeth. Monthly payments look harmless. People stop thinking about total cost and start thinking only about whether the payment fits this month. It's like buying a luxury car because the dealer tells you the lease is affordable, conveniently ignoring what happens when the lease ends. Cheap money makes everyone feel brilliant. It turns caution into something that looks old-fashioned. This works until it doesn't. Now add institutional money to the mix, and this is where families never stood a chance. Large investors weren't buying homes the way you buy a place to live. They were buying spreadsheets, thousands of them. Entire neighborhoods became line items. When you can borrow hundreds of millions at low rates, you don't negotiate emotionally. You outbid, you absorb losses, you wait. Regular families can't compete with that. They stretch further, bid higher, waive protections, all because they're told this is their only shot. This works, until it doesn't. And then came remote work, the great reshuffling that convinced everyone geography no longer mattered. People left expensive cities and flooded into smaller markets, chasing space and freedom. On paper, it looked logical. Cheaper homes, same salary. But prices didn't stay cheap for long. Local wages never caught up, but housing prices sprinted ahead like they were running late for a meeting. Entire towns were repriced based on incomes that didn't actually live there. This works, until it doesn't. Here's the dangerous part. None of these forces are crazy on their own. Each one makes sense in isolation. That's why bubbles are so persuasive. They don't feel reckless while they're forming. They feel innovative. They feel smart. They feel like progress. But stack them together and you get a system that depends on everything going right all the time. What happens when stimulus fades? What happens when rates rise? What happens when investors decide returns aren't worth the headache? What happens when companies quietly pull back on remote work? You don't need all of them to reverse. You just need one. That's the part nobody likes to talk about. I'll give you a simple image. Imagine a table with 4 legs. It looks solid. You can pile weight on it, but each leg was built assuming the others would never weaken. You don't need the table to explode. You just need one leg to crack. The collapse isn't dramatic at first. It's sudden. This entire bubble was built on conditions that were treated as permanent, even though history screams they never are. That's not conspiracy. That's pattern recognition. The same story, different decade, new costumes. And the moment you understand that, you stop asking why prices went so high and start asking a much better question: what happens when these engines stop pushing? Now, I want you to understand how this actually breaks, because this part is never explained clearly while it's happening. It always looks messy in hindsight, but the sequence is almost boring in how predictable it is. It starts quietly. Inventory creeps up. Homes don't vanish in a weekend anymore. They sit. A few weeks turn into a few months. Sellers tell themselves it's seasonal, or buyers are just waiting. They lower the price a little. 5%. 10%. Nothing dramatic. Yet. At the same time, buyers begin to disappear. Not because they don't want a home, but because the math no longer works. Payments are higher. Lending is tighter. Confidence is gone. People don't rush into a burning building. They step back and watch. And when buyers step back, gravity takes over. Then you see the first distressed sellers. These aren't people who want to sell. These are people who have to. A layoff, a divorce, an adjustable rate that just reset. Medical bills. Life doesn't schedule its problems around housing cycles. These sellers cut aggressively. They don't negotiate. They take what they can get. And the moment one house sells for less, the entire neighborhood gets repriced lower. That's not opinion. That's how comps work. This is where psychology flips. Yesterday's buyers become tomorrow's spectators. Why buy today if prices might be lower next month? Demand freezes. Sellers panic. Some rush for the exits. Others cling to hope. Both choices feed the same outcome: more inventory, fewer buyers, falling prices. Then the banks enter the picture, and this is where things accelerate. Banks don't want houses. They want loans to perform. When defaults rise and foreclosures stack up, banks become forced sellers. They don't wait for the perfect price. They dump. Volume matters more than value. And when banks start selling, prices don't drift down. They drop. This is the moment when people realize the equity they were counting on has evaporated. Retirement plans built on home values disappear. Owners who bought near the top find themselves underwater, owing more than the house is worth. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. At a certain point, walking away becomes rational. Painful, yes, but rational. When enough people make that calculation, the system starts to fracture. And it doesn't stop at housing. It never does. Construction slows, then stops. Contractors lose work. Realtors vanish. Mortgage brokers dry up. Title companies, inspectors, movers, furniture stores, appliance retailers, entire industries feel it at once. People lose income. Spending pulls back. Restaurants empty. Vacations get canceled. Credit tightens everywhere. This is how contagion spreads. Real estate doesn't collapse in isolation. It drags confidence with it. It drags employment with it. It drags the broader economy into the room and slams the door behind it. I've seen this before. Not once, not twice. Every time the story is the same. Easy money convinces people risk no longer exists. Leverage builds quietly. Prices detach from reality. Then conditions change, just a little, and suddenly everyone asks the same question at the same time, who's buying? When the answer is no one, the unwind becomes violent. This isn't fear-mongering, it's mechanics. You don't need a headline screaming disaster. You don't need a villain. You just need debt meeting reality. And reality is undefeated. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The most damage is always done after people realize what's happening, but before they accept it. That delay is brutal. Hope lingers. Denial stretches the pain. By the time acceptance arrives, options are gone. The system doesn't collapse all at once. It buckles in stages. Each stage feeds the next. Inventory, price cuts, panic, forced selling, credit stress, economic fallout. You can rewind history and watch this sequence play out again and again. Different decade, same ending, and when people say, no one could have seen this coming, that's never true. The signs are always there. They're just ignored because they're inconvenient. The market doesn't punish ignorance. It punishes unpreparedness. And by the time this phase is obvious to everyone, the damage is already done. That's why this moment matters. Not because it's dramatic, but because once the sequence starts, it doesn't ask for permission. It just moves. Now, let's slow this down because panic is expensive and clarity is priceless. Everything I've said so far isn't meant to scare you into freezing. It's meant to put you back in control. Crises don't destroy everyone equally. They separate people. And who ends up hurt has very little to do with intelligence and everything to do with preparation. If you're thinking about buying a home right now, I want you to be brutally honest with yourself. Are you buying because you truly need a place to live, or because you're afraid you'll be left behind? Fear is a terrible financial advisor. It rushes decisions. It ignores risk. If you can rent comfortably and preserve cash, that's not failure. That's flexibility. Cash doesn't scream. It waits. And waiting in moments like this is often the smartest move you can make. If you already own a home, the question isn't whether prices go up or down next year. The question is whether you can afford to stay where you are without stress. Fixed rate, manageable payment, breathing room. If that's you, congratulations. Tune out the noise. Markets go through cycles. Your job is to survive them, not predict every wiggle. But if you're stretched thin, if every surprise feels like a threat, then pretending everything is fine is not optimism. It's denial. Sometimes protecting yourself means accepting a smaller loss today to avoid a devastating one tomorrow. Pride is expensive. I've seen people pay dearly for it. And then there's the third group, the quiet one, the people holding liquidity. Cash doesn't get a lot of love during bubbles. It looks boring. It looks lazy. Everyone else seems smarter while prices rise. But when the music stops, cash becomes power. It gives you options. It lets you negotiate. It lets you choose instead of react. Opportunities don't announce themselves with fireworks. They show up when everyone else is exhausted, emotional, and forced to act. That's when disciplined capital builds real wealth. There's a simple rule that cuts through all the noise. Never make major financial decisions from a place of fear. Fear tells you to rush. Fear tells you this time is different. Fear tells you to ignore risk because everyone else is doing it. Discipline does the opposite. Discipline feels boring in good times and brilliant in bad ones. Here's the truth most people learn too late. Bubbles don't punish the unaware. Plenty of unaware people get lucky. Bubbles punish the unprepared. They punish people who tied their entire future to one assumption continuing forever. They punish people who mistook leverage for intelligence and optimism for strategy. I'm not telling you the world is ending. I'm telling you cycles exist. They always have. They always will. And the people who come out the other side intact aren't the loudest or the boldest. They're the ones who stayed liquid, stayed patient, and stayed rational while everyone else was chasing comfort. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. You don't need to predict the exact moment a bubble breaks. You just need to make sure you're not standing under it when it does. Stay calm, stay disciplined, and above all, stay prepared.